this afternoon for our Let's Talk session. We are discussing this afternoon a topic that has been in the media over recent times. It's really medical marijuana. We're going to talk about marijuana. We're going to talk about its use in medicine. And of course, we have with us as our special guest, Dr. Jerry Simon. Dr. Simon is no stranger to Let's Talk. He has been on Let's Talk perhaps more. He's probably one of our most frequent guests. We are happy to have him, and I'm sure he's going to be back again. Anyway, we want to begin with a word of prayer. We invite you to bow your heads and close your eyes if you're able to. Almighty Father, Lord God, be with us as we go into this afternoon session. We pray for your wisdom. We ask that you will take full control and grant us a productive afternoon session. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Well, friends, as indicated, we are going to be talking about medical marijuana. We are looking at the whole matter of what is marijuana in the first instance, and we are going to be looking at the whole issue of, you know, if there are medicinal properties in it, how do we get them, and should we use them as Christians? So with me, as I indicated, to talk about this is Dr. Jerry Simon. Dr. Simon is a medical doctor. He is a what we call a specialist in the area of addiction medicine. He has worked with the Crossroads Rehabilitation Center, and he has also, currently, he is, I understand, the chief physician at the NSA, that is National Stroke Association. He is also a clinician at the American University of Antigua. Dr. Simon, we are delighted to have you with us this afternoon, and let's talk again. Just say a word of greeting to our listeners on Second Advent and our viewers on YouTube.
Thanks very much, Dr. Greene, and thanks very much for the opportunity just to share with your listeners and with the general audience thoughts on this very important topic. I have to apologize a little bit for the audio video because where normally sit is very noisy today. I guess someone mowing the lawn on the Holy Sabbath day, so it's kind of a bit distracting today. But I'll try my best to soldier through.
That's all right, Doc. And I know that we initially had planned for somebody to accompany you. That didn't work out last minute, but we are delighted to have you. We know that you're very competent, and I'm sure you will do justice to this topic. To all of our viewers,
no problem.
Remember, you can place your questions in the chat, and we would be happy to answer them, especially as we go towards the halfway mark. But I want to begin, Dr. Simon. We're talking about medical marijuana, but before we go into the aspects of medicine, marijuana has been a controversial topic for a long time. In fact, my first recollection of hearing about marijuana, I was in primary school. I remember it was one afternoon when some exciting news came. We were very young, but a group of Rastafarians. Rastafarianism was new to Antigua, and a group of Rastafarians were marching through the community. And I didn't know who they were, what it was all about, but somebody explained these are the people that use, in those terms, we used to say herbs. And that was my first recollection. That is my first recollection of hearing about marijuana. It has been a controversial topic for a long time. So let's begin by talking about a little bit about recreational marijuana. What exactly is marijuana, and how does it impact the user?
Marijuana is the product, and in this case, we're talking about how we use it, or how it's being used, the leaves and buds and flowers of a plant called cannabis sativum. And it's something that's very common throughout the Caribbean. It's grown naturally in the Caribbean and in many other places. And it's used mainly as a smoked herb. At least people who smoke it or who use it for recreational purposes normally smoke the leaves and the buds and the flowers, just like you find for tobacco and other plants of that type. It has properties where it can change perception. It gives people what they call a high, that is, makes them calmer or more excited, and can change our, how do I put it? It can change your mental perception, so to speak, or emotional perception, so to speak. So it's a very commonly used plant. Over the past few decades, and even before that, maybe even centuries, there are some who have used it for medicinal purposes, that is, to help with pain and other issues. And this is where the crux of the matter lies right now when it comes to what we call marijuana or medical marijuana, where because of its chemical properties in terms of treating certain diseases and ailments, certain physical symptoms, it has been, decriminalized and legalized in many countries. And since it was a plant that was criminalized and illegalized for so many years and decades and even centuries, now that you find that the plant is being legalized, there's a lot of controversy surrounding that, the whole question of its legalization and its use.
Okay, Doc. Now, you mentioned just now that it was an illegal substance for many years in Antigua. Here, they have just decriminalized it. It therefore sparked a lot of debates. I myself attended some of the sessions that the government hosted. The town hall meetings when they were considering whether or not they should decriminalize it. Now, there is a lot of debates over whether there are negative effects. So in terms of the recreational marijuana, people smoke it commonly. You hear people say, give me a spliff. Is there a negative impact that it has? Let's talk about that for a minute. The people who smoke marijuana, does it negatively impact the body in any way?
Marijuana can negatively impact the body, and as with any smoked substance, it can cause problem for the lungs. Although we must admit that marijuana does not seem to be associated with lung cancer, at least not to the extent as, say, tobacco, but it can cause certain problem with the lungs. It also can cause problems for younger people, especially teens who smoke marijuana, what we call the amotivational syndrome. And that is something that I don't want ever to be lost. Studies have shown that most young people who smoke marijuana tend to lose interest. And when I say smoke marijuana to an extent where they become addictive or where they, that in high quantities, they find that they become less motivated for school, their performance in school drops. In fact, most of the times when I see children here in Antigua or teens here in Antigua, and their parents will bring them to me regarding their marijuana use, abuse, or addiction, what I find is that one of the first questions I ask, what are their grades now in school compared to, let's say, 2-3 years ago before they started using marijuana? And almost invariably, you're going from a A student or B student to a D or F student, or student who's not even in school now. And that is what I normally see a lot with marijuana use, that amotivational syndrome, where the patient or the student is no longer motivated to learn. His work becomes secondary. There's not the interest, the behavior changes. The other thing that's very important is that marijuana is an addictive substance. And regardless of how good or bad a substance is, once it becomes addictive, then you have the problems that go along with addiction. And, again, the lack of interest of other things, change of behavior, lack of interest for God, lack of interest for family, all these things start to happen. And one of the things I always explain to parents again is that when teens use drugs, and this is not unique alone to marijuana, it happens with other substances, is that when you start to use drugs in your teenage years, because the brain is being formed in those years, and especially the dorsal portion of the brain is growing faster than, let's say, the frontal portion of the brain in those years, is that you run the risk of a lifelong addiction or lifetime addiction compared to people who start to use drugs at a later age, let's say from the mid-20s going on. So it's some of these negative effects that we have of marijuana that we cannot ignore. Suffice it to say, the medical physical effects are less to some extent, but nonetheless they do occur.
Now, Doc, you mentioned the addictive nature of marijuana. And I know that there are lots of folks who are listening who may have concerns. In fact, a question just came in. We don't generally answer questions so early on, but I'm tempted to ask this one because here is somebody saying, listen, how do I help my son off marijuana? What is your recommendation to help a parent that feels and do not agree this is a good practice of a child? So I kind of hear a parent saying, I have a little concern here over my child. My child is still very young and seem to be getting involved in this drug. What can I do to help him off?
Very, very good question off the bat. And I must explain as well, in terms of addiction, marijuana is not the most addictive substance on its own. It has an addictive index of about 0.18. Just to explain what that means, if you find 100 regular users of marijuana around, and using reasonable amounts, so to speak, you'll find that around 18% would become addicted. You compare that to, let's say, cocaine, which is about twice that amount, or at least about 0.3 in terms of cocaine, and alcohol, more addictive as well. And tobacco is almost 0.4. Tobacco cigarettes are much more addictive. However, nonetheless, we have to recognize that marijuana is addictive, number one. And number two, that what happens quite often is that to trap children, I should say, these dealers and sellers will often place other substance in the marijuana that they sell our children. Sometimes they add tobacco to it, like I said, which is a much more addictive substance. Sometimes they add embalming fluid. They add other substances that are more addictive. And as a result, the physical illnesses occur. Sometimes headaches, injury to the brain. Sometimes those physical illnesses occur. And also the substance is more addictive. To any parent who's concerned that the children smoke marijuana, and I know in the Caribbean, there's a culture among some that marijuana is jaweed, that is a natural plant, that, some will say there's nothing wrong with it if Jah made it. But we have to understand that, everything is made by God, so to speak. It doesn't mean that everything is made for our consummation. Everything is made for us to take in internally. And I would always advise a parent who has a child with a marijuana abuse to get help, to get professional help. It might be a physician, it might be a counselor, or someone who's trained in addiction medicine or addiction counseling. It's very important to get that help and get that help early, because the longer you wait to get help, the more difficult it is that child gonna recover, so to speak, of their disease or illness, which we call addiction.
Well, let me just ask you, Doc. I'm coming off the marijuana issue just for a moment, because when I introduced you earlier on, I said that you were a doctor who specializes in addiction medicine. So if a person has an addiction, whether it be to alcohol, to crack, cocaine, marijuana, tobacco, anything to that effect, and that person comes to you, in terms of, I'm just trying to understand addiction medicine and what you folks do in terms of treating them. Is it just a matter of cleaning their system, or do we pair that with counseling? What really happens?
Well, two things happen. Number one, you have to ensure the physical safety of that patient. Because let's say the person is coming off alcohol use and you stop that use right away, or the use is stopped right away. That can lead to something we call delirium tremens, and they could even die. They could die from seizures and things like that when you stop alcohol right away. Some other drugs, when you stop them right away, for example, benzodiazepines like your diazepam, your Valium, your lorazepam, which a lot of people use to help with sleep and other issues. If you stop them right away as well, that can cause death as well too. So in terms of alcohol and medications like those, the benzodiazepines, you have what we call a detox period. And in the detox period, you give them small amounts of the same lorazepam, so to speak, until their body, get used to the small amounts, and then you can stop. Okay. In the case of marijuana, marijuana and cocaine, you don't find that stopping them instantly will cause death. But what it does, it can cause them to get very agitated. It's more of a mental or emotional withdrawal they will have, as opposed to physical withdrawal. So when you stop the chemical, you don't necessarily have to replace it with another chemical, but yes, with the counseling and the lifestyle changes, diet, nutrition, exercise, all these become important. So in the treatment of addiction is a twofold matter. First and foremost is a medical matter to make sure that the patient is safe, that the patient is not going to die from you just stopping whatever substance they're using. But it's also the emotional aspect, the mental aspect of treatment is very important. The lifestyle aspect is very important. And surprising maybe to some, but for us as Christian physicians, we know that spiritual healing is just as important in terms of getting someone off drugs. So we do encourage people to pray, to read the Bible, to find solace and strength from a spiritual standpoint as well.
Okay, well, let's go back to the debate now. Are there long-term consequences of the use of marijuana?
As I mentioned before, it can be addictive, and just the things that come along with an addiction. The fact that you use a substance, you can't stop use it. You will commit crime to get that substance. That is, steal, lie, beg, do anything to get that substance. So it leaves you, and because again, previously it was criminalized or illegalized, it means that quite often the use of a substance involve criminal activities. Speaking of marijuana as a substance, putting away the criminal aspect of it as a substance, yes, there's long-term consequences. I mentioned the amotivational syndrome, and that is something very, very big I don't want anyone to lose, because what we do find is that even into college years and at college level, students who engage in a lot of marijuana smoking, they again are coming down with that amotivational syndrome, and for life, we can see they have certain problems where they're not thriving in their schoolwork or in their studies. They don't thrive in business sometimes, and in life in general, it really is a disruptive kind of situation where they don't thrive in life. So we do have to make the point that maybe most of the symptoms or the consequences of marijuana may not be a physical problem that goes along with its use, but the mental, emotional, and social issues can definitely, make up for those consequences, so to speak, or make up those consequences and make it a dangerous substance for use.
Okay, very well. Now, the whole idea of when you spoke earlier, you indicated that what was it that you said again? I was trying to tie this question to a comment you made early on. The smoking aspect, you said in your response that as is common to things that are smoked. So my question is the matter of smoking, apart from the THC exciting the brain. Are there risks associated with smoking substances? So whether it be I smoke some grass or tobacco or anything, the smoke, is that in itself a challenge?
There's always a risk associated with smoking anything because you're bringing solid particles into your lungs. Smoke is, the fact that we can see smoke is because smoke have not only gaseous properties to it, but also solid, properties. There's solid particles in smoke. And putting solid particles into your lungs can indeed cause problems. But one of the things I want for us to bear in mind as well too, marijuana is not only smoked, it can be cooked or baked or fried and prepared in different ways. And for people who use marijuana, they can tell you when you eat the so-called marijuana cookie or marijuana patty, that can cause some serious issues. I know a certain gentleman who ate a marijuana cookie for the first time in his life, didn't know much about it, and ate it. And for a long period of time, the immediate effect was when he started to drive on his way home, he said he was seeing like 4 or 5 different roads, and he's like the car was flying. That was one thing, one effect. And secondly, for a long while after that, for days to weeks or months after that, he had the effect of the marijuana as well, where he was just feeling weird, not feeling himself, talking things out of his head. It was just a strange feeling, he said, until that thing wore off out of his body. So not only the smoked property of marijuana, but the other forms they use it recreationally as well can be dangerous if they use in the quantities that can cause us to lose impairment.
That's very interesting, because I was intending to ask you later, well, since you brought it up, that you can use it in food. And the interesting thing is, I've heard a lot of people say that, in Antigua these days, I understand that it's now legal that you can have, is it 3 plants in your backyard?
I think 4 plants or something like that. Yeah.
4 plants. Okay. So I've heard people say that they drink it as a tea. Now, you just mentioned that people put it in cookies and it can have some significant impact on you. What about using it as a tea?
Marijuana as a plant, as a substance, has many good properties. And this is something as a physician, who generally support the use of plants or natural medicine. I must admit, it does have some good properties in terms of helping people with pain, helping people with, for example, patients with HIV, who generally would go very cachexic. That is, they would lose a lot of weight and look emaciated. We have known that certain marijuana products can help them to increase their appetite and make them eat more and put back on weight and things like that. It also has properties in terms of epilepsy. Patients who are what we call refractory epilepsy, sometimes they would have epileptic seizures, more than 10 per day, sometimes 20, 30, 40 seizures per day. And we have known that since the 50s, that marijuana has been a substance that can help these patients in terms of lowering the seizures. Sometimes they're down to 1 or 2 a day, or even none at all. However, we must recognize that even if you can use it as a tea, which is a much safer way of using marijuana, it helps, for example, people who are asthmatic, people who have upper respiratory problems, headaches, and other things like that, that you cannot overdo with anything. And this way is very important to learn from someone. That's why I wish Dr. Humphreys was with us, because he's a physician who knows a lot of the plants and in terms of the dosage. And it's very important that for us to kind of know the dosage that we're using. If you're using 2 leaves in your tea, it's not the same as using 10 leaves. Okay, the same thing if you're using, let's say, any other plant that we use as tea. There's always a limit and always a quantity that you should be using as opposed to what you should not be using. So whereas it's much safer using it in tea, you can overdo as well with the tea, and it can cause problems as well, just like any other plant that you overdose on.
That's a very interesting topic that you are broaching there. My neighbor gave me a plant, not a marijuana plant. A plant. She said it's paracetamol. Now the interesting thing is, actually, she didn't give me. She showed me it and offered to give me, but An old lady in the church had given me that plant before, and I had brought it home and I planted it, and it was taking over, my garden, etc. And I said I was going to take it. I was just about to pull it out and throw it out. I didn't know what it was, and that's the time my neighbor came and said, "Listen, I have this plant. It's paracetamol. I can give you a piece." And when I saw it, I realized, I said, but I have this, and I was just going to throw it out. So here you have a medicinal plant, but you're introducing the subject of dosage, of how we use it. As a child, I know that my mother had 9 children. We lived as a child in a very small house. We got some soursop bush to drink every night. That made us sleep soundly. But how do we know how much is good and how much is not good?
There are physicians who are studying these plants daily, and this is something that people need to understand. Not because something is natural, it doesn't mean you can take it in any quantities that you feel like. It's just like eating mangoes. I love mangoes. I'm sure a lot of other people love mangoes as well. But you know that if you eat too many mangoes in a day, and too many might be different for some people, that it can cause your sugar to spike. Not necessarily maybe cause diabetes, but if you're diabetic, it could cause your sugar to spike in a moment, and it can be detrimental. So as with any other substance, just like when you go to a doctor, he gives you a medication, he tells you take 1 tablet twice a day for a week. Marijuana has its dosage as well. And it's very important that you're guided by someone who has familiarity in the use of marijuana as a medicine, who has knowledge as a physician, and can say to you, hey, this is the amount that you use. Because what we find often, people who use plants sometimes do have adverse effects. They have allergies sometimes, but apart from the allergies, they tend to overdose as well because they might use too much of a particular plant. So it's important as well to have someone guiding you in the use of these natural plants until you kind of know for yourself what is safe or what is unsafe.
Now, Doc, and let's talk. We like to get practical, and we like to not hide information.
Sure.
The marijuana plant, we know, as you indicated earlier, was considered criminal. If a person was found with it, could be jailed, etc. We also have other substances that are legal, but that clearly create a number of negative effects. So how does one compare marijuana use? And as a physician, you may be in a very good position to answer this question. How does one compare marijuana use and impact with that of, let's say, alcohol or tobacco, which both substances are legal, so to speak?
Quite often, as physician and as a Christian, we have to be very careful, addressing questions of those sort, in the sense that being honest, yes, and being practical. For example, tobacco cigarettes kill in excess or contribute to the death in excess of 7 million people a year. Okay, almost 8 million people worldwide. In fact, I think it crosses the 8 million mark. And what you find is that secondhand smoke itself, okay, that is people who do not smoke, but we might be around smokers. Second and third hand smoke, for example, babies who are held in their arms by their moms have died from tobacco use. So we're talking about a 10% or a little less than 10% of people who die from tobacco use, smoking, will not have even smoked themselves, okay? That's 7 million people, or more than 7 million people worldwide. Alcohol causes serious amount of damage, not only in terms of the medical problems, the liver, the kidney, brain. Alcohol damages just about every organ in your body, but also the emotional aspect of alcohol use. Lots of times you hear that husbands are, abusing their wives, physically abusing their wives and abusing their children. The financial abuse in terms of what people spend buying alcohol as opposed to putting into their family upkeep, and other questions of alcohol use makes alcohol such a dangerous substance although it's legal. Suffice it to say, marijuana, in my estimation, as a physician and from the literature and from the research, does not cause as much, social or medical problems overall compared to, let's say, tobacco and alcohol. But it's not a zero consequence drug either. It does have its consequence.
Now, I want to
Well,
ask you. Sorry, you're not finished. Go right ahead.
no, sorry. I think there's a call was interrupting the thing. But what would be my my takeaway from this is that whether or not a substance is legal or illegal from a government perspective, as a Christian and as a child of God and as a physician, we have to be careful what we're going to put into our bodies. And we have to do our research and be guided by practical science and by biblical knowledge as to something that would be dangerous for us. One of the things I always tell people, when Jesus was on the cross, that they twice they offered him that drink in the sponge. Remember, the first time he refused, the second time he took it. The first time before he died, okay, or before the Bible says he gave up the ghost and died. That substance, what they give, the vinegar, not just a plain vinegar. It was a substance that actually numbs your mind. In fact, the soldiers, in a sense, were being kind to him. It was something that would numb your mind and numb the pain. But in the process of numbing the pain, it could have caused him to make a decision because of the numbness of his brain. Could make even at that point, you could say, hey, I'm coming off the cross. I'm not dying for humanity anymore. Okay? So I'm just saying all the time, any substance that we take that causes a psychotropic effect, that is, can change our mindset, change how we see things, change how the brain works, can be dangerous for us and cause us to make decisions, accidents, like people who drive drunk, drive intoxicated. We know so many accidents that they cause. So anything that can cause the brain to change, whether it be short term or long term, we have to be careful with those substances.
Very interesting, Doc. I'm tempted to ask some more along that line, but there are so many questions coming in, and we want to move on to the medical aspect likewise. But perhaps we should answer this question here, because somebody, maybe I should have asked this earlier, but I didn't see it. But somebody's asking here, what exactly does decriminalize mean? We have been saying, listen, they're decriminalizing marijuana, and the person wants to know, what does decriminalize mean?
Well, what I know from the decriminalization of marijuana, it's still an illegal substance, so to speak. And I guess I need a lawyer to explain this. But having certain quantities, I think there's a 25 gram or 15 gram limit, something along that line, on your person, or having 4 plants in your possession. I think those are allowed. It's like a ticketable offense, so to speak. So it's almost like if you drive on the road above 40 miles per hour in Antigua, it's not necessarily a criminal event, I guess, except you kill somebody, but it's not necessarily a criminal event, but it's a ticketable, or what the Americans will call a misdemeanor, so to speak. So marijuana is not a free-for-all substance. If I have 100 oranges in my backyard, nobody's going to come and lock me up unless I stole them. Nobody's going to lock me up to say, Dr. Simon, you have 100 oranges in your backyard and that's too much oranges. But for marijuana, though, you can have too much in your possession because it's a decriminalized substance as opposed to a fully legal substance. So I hope that can explain to the person, the question that they have.
Yeah, definitely. I heard a lawyer once argue that, listen, this is a naturally occurring plant, and it should never have, you really shouldn't say that a natural substance is illegal, but that's for another discussion, another time. That as we go to the medical side of it, you already hinted that the marijuana can be used for certain kinds of illnesses. Is there a difference between the marijuana that is smoked and the marijuana that they're using for medical purposes?
An excellent question, because marijuana has two main active ingredients, if you want to put it. There's the THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the part of it that makes it addictive, that gives us a high, so to speak, the kind of recreational, what people are seeking. And I must explain here as well too. When we look at the THC content of marijuana, let's say back in the day, of course, that you spoke about, the Rasta men back in the day were protesting for marijuana use. They would have planted marijuana that generally has a 5% or less THC content. Nowadays, with the engineered marijuana, especially for commercial quotes unquote, because it's illegal commercial activity, where people will be selling marijuana for the children and to others, the THC content can be high as nearly 50%. Depends on how they engineer the plant, wow. The hybridization, the genetic manipulation and engineering. You could have nearly a 50% THC content. So let's say back in the day, a Rasta man who smoked, let's say 10 joints. Today, when you smoke one joint or two joints, you might be getting that 10 joints effect. So that's something that we have to recognize. The other aspect of marijuana is the cannabinoid effect, or the other chemicals in it that are not THC, that has been shown to help with pain and epilepsy and other sorts of illnesses. And that's the part, when we say medical marijuana, that aspect of the marijuana, that particular chemical, is extracted and used more than, let's say, the THC, okay? So for example, you can go to some of our health food stores in Antigua. I know certain health food stores in Antigua that has cannabis product, marijuana products that don't necessarily have the THC. It has maybe a 0.01% THC, because it's almost impossible to extract all the THC, but it has a 0.01%. So what you get is a cannabinoid, which is more the one that you want the effect of, to reduce the pain and to deal with the epilepsy and other conditions that you're treating. So there is a difference. Let's say I plant a marijuana in my backyard, smoke the whole plant, as opposed to what a physician might want me to use in terms of a condition that he or her is treating. What we must recognize as well too, there are some people who, holistic physicians, and I'm not going to discount them either, who says it's best to use the plant as a whole. Because when you use the plant as a whole, not extracting just the effect that you want or the chemical that you want, that you get the more natural effect. There's some merits in that as well. I'm not going to fool anyone. There's some merits in using the plant as a whole, because we do find that in certain instances, when you use a plant as a whole, you do get beneficial effects that you don't get by just extracting a single chemical. But suffice it to say, it might be safer from an addictive point of view for you to be using the extracted, chemical that you need from the plant, as opposed to the whole plant in some instances.
So before the program started today, somebody called to ask whether marijuana in any form, be it medical marijuana or the natural whole plant thing, whether it is recommended that we use any of it. What I hear you saying is that there are definitely some kinds of diseases, conditions that especially if they extract the substance from the plant, can be administered in a safe environment for the benefit of the user. Am I getting it correctly?
Definitely, most correctly. Look here, out of many medicines that we can use that are much more dangerous than marijuana. Okay? Many medicines. You go to your doctor, for example, to use aspirin. Aspirin has been shown to cause stomach cancer. It can cause ulcerations, bleeding in the stomach, and eventually can cause cancer. You have antibiotics that we use a lot for people with infections. You go to the doctor with a sore throat and he says you have a strep throat, you have a throat infection. He gives you an antibiotic. That antibiotic can have dangerous effects for you as well, okay? Even the vaccine that we promote for COVID-19, for example, yes, I think in general they're safe, but there's not a zero risk. So there's no medicine that has a zero risk. Marijuana does not have a zero risk either. Okay, whether it's the whole plant or the extracted portion, there's no zero risk in medication, but it's much safer than many other medicines that we're using right now. And if we can find medical use for it in terms of, safe medical use, dosification, chemical composition that's safe, that can be used to treat illnesses that we can't treat right now as effectively, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But I will always emphasize that the recreational, nonchalant use of marijuana for the heck of it, that some people would like to do, I would still say is dangerous because of the effects that I spoke about earlier. It's something dangerous for us to use willy-nilly, like we're drinking water.
I heard a physician at the psychiatric hospital say that there is an increase of people on the ward due to marijuana use. So does it have that effect as well?
Oh, yes. And if I didn't mention that before, I'm very sorry, but marijuana can cause, it can cause psychotic illnesses. And what we find is that especially younger people, and I guess males might use it a bit more than females, but male or female, younger people, when they smoke this hybrid marijuana, that is this marijuana with, we're looking at 30, 40, 50% THC content, as opposed to, let's say, the marijuana that were planted in your backyard years ago that have maybe a 5% or less. We do see it has that psychotic effect. And I remember when I worked at Clearview Hospital, Psychiatric Hospital, we had an area we called maximum security. And maximum security had kind of bad name to use, but that was what it is in effect. People who are really psychotic, acutely psychotic. And you will have maybe 16 beds in maximum security. I think 6 beds for females, about 10 beds for males. And out of those 10 beds for males, or out of the 16 beds, we were looking at maybe 12 or more for patients who would come in because of substance use. And quite often, that substance was marijuana. Yes, there were some cocaine users as well, but in our Antiguan environment, quite often, that was marijuana use, causing those patients to be psychotic. So yes.
I suppose I just looked at this question, and I suppose that's the answer to this question, because somebody's saying here, a family member who started to smoke marijuana has been acting crazy, and they were asking, why is that? So that sounds like the answer to that question.
Definitely. Definitely. Don't underestimate the use again of any substance that can change your mind and change your emotions. Even the medication that a doctor would prescribe for you. Let's say you're psychotic or depressed or anxious, and a doctor prescribes a medication for you, not necessarily marijuana, a quote unquote, regular medication, olanzapine or Prozac that Americans use quite a lot. Any medication that can change your emotions, so to speak, can be dangerous for you, because we do know these medications have side effects, and the side effects can be detrimental.
Okay, let me ask another question before we continue the medical discussion. This person is asking here, is marijuana considered a chemical substance like cocaine, and does it create pathways in the brain that are irreparable as well?
Yes, marijuana is a chemical substance. And just to go into a little brain chemistry, when our brain has what we call the reward pathway, the dopamine pathway. That's something normal and natural in everyone's brain. We know that psychotropic medications or psychotropic drugs, marijuana, cocaine, alcohol, they affect your reward pathway. Marijuana does it as well too. Maybe not to the extent like cocaine does, but it's a similar kind of process and that's why we become addicted to these chemicals, because they do affect the brain and do affect the pathways in the brain. So marijuana, yes, I mentioned it has about a 0.18 addictive index. So it is an addictive substance, and it is addictive because it changes the pathway in your brain.
Interesting. And the point here is that Once there is something that is going to give me an altered mood in terms of my brain, then I need to be careful with that. I
Yes,
generally say to persons, you don't want to lose control of you because you can
that's
do
true.
things that you would regret later on. Let's go back a little bit to the discussion, the medical side of marijuana now. It, I went into the health food store, our health food store. People generally refer to it as the Adventist book center. And I saw there, which is a substance that I've purchased and used, hemp seed. I Googled what is hemp seed, and it says that it is cannabis, cannabis,
Cannabis.
and it's. But they did explain though that it doesn't contain that concentration of HTC. So earlier you mentioned that there are useful elements of the plant. My question with this hemp seed, what is the relationship of the marijuana that is commonly used for recreational purposes and the hemp seed that I purchased at the health food store?
Hemp is something much different in terms of its effect. First of all, it doesn't have the THC in any great quantities, so it's not addictive. Hemp seeds actually is a good source of protein. So I often mention to people who are vegetarians, who might be concerned that they might not be getting enough protein. Hemp seeds are a good source of protein. What I do with hemp seeds, I normally would spread it on my cereal or yogurt and things like that when I eat it, because it is a good source of protein. It's also a good source of fiber, and we know the many uses of fiber in terms of preventing diabetes and even hypertension and clearing the colon and things like that. So that's a good product. When I saw the product at the Adventist Book Center as well too, I tell them I'll give them an endorsement for it. So thanks for the opportunity, because it is a safe product and it is a very useful product. It's not in any way going to cause any problems in terms of addiction. It's not going to cause any problem in terms of mind control. It's a safe product. It's something that we can use. For example, people who are vegetarian, people who are concerned about eating healthy, the hemp seed I would definitely recommend.
All right, now we're going to take a few more questions. This person here is now asking, just a second, I lost that one. I'll come back to it in a while. Okay, I think you answered that one, so let's go to this one. Is not proven that as a green plant, it has good medicinal benefits. However, when dried and smoked, that is when it is really lethal. I suppose this person is saying that, if it's green, it's one thing. If it's dried and smoked, it's another thing. I don't know if you want to comment on that, though.
The marijuana plant have been studied almost as much as just about any other plant, in recent times, and even for times before. And the dried product can be useful or is useful, just like sometimes you dry your leaves when you're doing tea. You can use the dried leaves, or you can use the green leaves. Just like the green leaves has more chlorophyll, which is a substance you find in just about every plant. And so it's useful whether you use it as a green plant or as a dried plant. Maybe the person alluding to smoking. And as I said before, anything that's smoked is dangerous, because smoking is bringing solid particles into your lungs. So I would not recommend, and I want to make it clear, I do not recommend smoking of marijuana or tobacco or any other substance. But yes, whether using the dried leaves or the green leaves for your tea or for whatever other medical preparations, yes, the marijuana plant is useful.
Here's an interesting question. Do you think we overdose on fever grass and other local plants we use?
Good question, and very fair question. You can overdose on plants, yes. I know there was a gentleman who was told by his doctor to use neem to help take his blood pressure down. He was a newly diagnosed hypertensive It might have been hypertension or diabetes, can't quite remember. And he went home and drank the thing morning, noon, night, around the clock. Next thing you know, he had to go back to the doctor because his pressure dropped too low, you know. So yes, in everything, there's moderation is important. And that's why I love in the old days when our so-called health ministry was called a health and temperance ministry. And I think we need to go back to that term, health and temperance, because when we learn to be temperate in all things, we would have, solved most of our medical problems. Most of the medical problems we have coming from a lack of temperance. So we have to be temperate in all things. And that's why I say as well too, at the Adventist Book Center, there are many good books on plants. There's one called the Medicinal Plants Encyclopedia. There's some of them on natural healing. If you go to the book center, these books even have doses as well too. Because I learned a lot from these books that we find at the ABC. Very good books that talk about the different plants with the dosage. So it's very important for us to know the dosage of whatever chemical we're using.
All right.
Natural or unnatural.
That's useful. I trust that our viewers and listeners are giving attention to that, because I do believe in a lot of natural products, but it is important to have a guide. I sometimes say that I wish I had spoken with my mother a little more. The older folks, they would, when they have certain illnesses, they would go and get this and get that, and somehow, maybe from experience, they were able to tell you that so much is good for you. But another question here is again interesting. Can the use of marijuana, smoking, that is, by a pregnant mother, have any effect on the unborn child? And what are they, if any?
Yes, any substance you use, whether it be a drug or not, whether it be innocuous or not, it can have effect for your unborn child. We know that the mood of the mother, okay, has a lot to do with the well-being of the unborn child. Okay, sometimes children are born with certain how do I put it, disadvantages from just being born from what their parents would have done. And we do know that although we're not necessarily seeing the alcohol baby, so to speak, with marijuana use. And when we said alcohol baby, you have patients who are born with what we call microcephaly, that they have the small head. They have certain what we call spinal neural defects, when they or certain malformations when the mother use alcohol and some other substances. We don't see that to the extent with marijuana use, but suffice it to say, it can cause addictive type tendencies even in children. Okay, the same thing that happens when some children are born of parents who use cocaine and heroin, that those type of those kind of substances, amphetamines, and some of those other drugs. The children sometimes do have withdrawals. So I'm not going to tell you that is the most dangerous thing, okay? But it can cause problems. So let's not fool ourselves to think that if I'm just smoking marijuana and I'm pregnant, that there's no consequence. There are consequences.
Well, what could you say a bit? You mentioned, very interesting too, that some persons actually die from tobacco smoke without having smoked tobacco. So the secondhand smoke effect. Now, occasionally you pass someplace and you know that people are smoking marijuana. Is the effect the same? Can a person get a high from exposure to secondhand marijuana smoke?
I know we used to have a running joke in Antigua that when the police announced that they're going to burn marijuana plants that they were confiscated from criminals, that they said the Rastamen would listen to the weather report to know which side of the wind to go. If you're in the presence for a long enough period and people are smoking and they're exhaling that smoke, or there's enough smoke around, yes, it can have a certain effect on you, especially if it's a strong THC content marijuana. For casual passing by people who are smoking, it's probably not going to cause any serious effect for you. But definitely if you're around long enough and you're inhaling enough of the smoke, it can cause an effect, yes.
Now, are some people affected more than others? Because I remember this teacher telling me one day that she came out of her classroom and was walking along the corridor, and they were not an Adventist school, of course,
I
And
hope not.
certainly not. And they were not in Antigua, but I wouldn't call the island less, But she said that there were some students smoking marijuana, and she passed by, and she said that knocked her out, and she was home for like 3 days.
It
From
can
that.
happen.
So are some persons impacted more than others?
It can happen, and suffice it to say as well too. There's always general facts, and there's also particular facts. For example, there are some people whom, because of their genetics, okay, the genes they would have inherited from their parents, are more susceptible to the physical effects of a particular chemical. And there are also some who are more likely to be addicted as well because of genetics. In fact, when I did my studies in addiction medicine, we found that from twin studies, what we call twin studies, around 40% of between 40 and 60% of who becomes addicted happens to do with their particular genetics, their particular inheritance. So yes, there's some people who are more susceptible to a chemical than others. It's just like they will tell you, and I'm sure you might know in the village all the time as we grew up, they would say some people, if they smell alcohol, they go drunk.
Yeah.
There's some people with a small amount of alcohol could go drunk. There's some people who could drink a gallon of alcohol and you don't seem to touch them. So yes, they're individual susceptibility. And these are things that we have to be careful, because what might be good for your child might not necessarily be good for my child. So parents have to be careful as well. Not because something is safe, and this is the so-called safe level, you still have to know yourself and know what is tolerable for you.
Okay, our time has just about expired, but I want to get in two questions here. One, sure. Somebody's asking about the eye. They heard that marijuana tea is good for your eyes, and they would like you to comment on that.
Yeah, as we know, glaucoma is a condition, and I guess they probably reference it to glaucoma. Glaucoma is a condition that causes pressure in the eye to build up, and this buildup of pressure can affect the retina, the nerves, the retinal nerve, and as a result, it can cause you to go blind over time. Well, there's some studies that showing that it can help with glaucoma by releasing the pressure in the eye. So yes, there are preparations that can help with that.
My final question this afternoon, Doc, is, you have shared a lot, and I want to know, with the push to decriminalizing marijuana. Now, when we consider, somebody earlier asked, what is decriminalization? And you did explain that it does not mean that it is legal necessarily. But there are lots of people in our community who do not make the distinction. Is there a danger when we are pushing for decriminalization or even legalization, that we at the same time may, whether intentionally or otherwise, increase the use? Is it, that people now think it's more accessible? So is there any danger there? But some persons also say that, if you legalize the thing, then it's going to lose it will. Yeah, that's right. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
And I'm glad you asked that. You frame it in that way as well too, because when the government was deciding to decriminalize marijuana, I was invited to cabinet, and one of the things the Prime Minister said, which is something I've always believed as well too, there were too many young men who get into the criminal justice system because they would have smoked marijuana. Now, as a physician, I would never equate using a substance, to being something criminal. That's a physician point of view. But of course, if the substance is criminalized or illegal, then from a legal point of view, it is illegal, it is criminal. So one of the things that we find, and I always tell young people, not because the government says something is good for you or they're not going to criminalize it, you still have to be mindful of the use. Whether it be alcohol, and I mentioned alcohol causing so much problems, it would mind-boggling the amount of monies that alcohol-related illnesses cause every year in Antigua here, in the United States, where they can actually give you figures. The numbers is mind-boggling. Paracetamol can cause problems with your liver. Aspirin can cause problems with your stomach. Any substance, legal or illegal, and especially those that are psychotropic, your benzodiazepines, your Valium, they can cause serious problems. So I always tell people, you know, we still have to educate our children, and here's where the church comes in. We have to be mindful that our children live in this world. They have peers who are not necessarily Christians. They have peers, and even those who are Christians might be struggling. We have to, from very early, teach our children the dangers of these substances and be mindful of them using these substances. To go back to the other side of the question, has it caused an increase in use? From what I'm seeing over the past few years, I'm not sure if there's an increase in use of marijuana in Antigua compared to what happened before. What we might find, though, is that it's more open, that people are not so much afraid now to say they use marijuana because it's not illegal anymore or criminalized anymore. Sorry, it's not criminalized anymore. So people maybe not be afraid to say they're using it, but I'm not sure there's an increased use. One of the schools of thought, as you mentioned, is that the novelty factor would be gone, and children either not rebelling against something, they might not be so inclined to do it, either not rebelling anymore. I'm not sure if that is the case either. I think we have to wait a little further down the road to get the studies and see. But suffice it to say, our message has to be to our children that anything that we use that is a mind-controlled substance that can control the mind in any way, shape, or form, change your emotions, change your thoughts, you cannot play with it. You cannot play with it. You have to, if you're using it for medical purposes, it has to be done under proper supervision. And the recreational use, I would not encourage the recreational use of these substances.
Well, that's a very good place to end, Doc. We appreciate that so much. That is very wise counsel. Do not play with it. There is a medical aspect of it, and that has to be done under supervision. Well, friends, that's where we wrap up today. I just want to let you know that next week we have a very interesting two-part beginning. Next week, we're going to be having two gentlemen from the Biblical Research Institute, two of the associate directors of the Biblical Research Institute. We're going to be having a discussion on Bible versions, hermeneutics. There are lots of folks who have this issue with whether you're using the King James Version versus another version. And the week after, they will continue the discussion. There is a charge of Catholic influence in the Adventist Church. We're going to explore that. And then I just want to give you a bit of some of the topics we have coming up, not in order, but we are going to be discussing on Let's Talk. We deal with everything on Let's Talk. Anything that is relevant and important for the Christian, we address. So we're going to be dealing with sometime this year, Christian dress. Should Rastas have to cut their locks to get baptized? Is jewelry salvific? What is appropriate attire for church? Then we will talk about the church's health message, diets and foods. What's so bad about eating flesh? These are some of the things we're going to be discussing. Next week, I will share some more. Our time is up now, so I can't go, but we have some very interesting. I should give you this one. The whole issue of the church and women. We have more women in the church than men. Why are there not more women in leadership? Is the man in charge of the woman? Is misogyny biblical? We have a lot of interesting stuff coming up on Let's Talk. So make sure you tune in every Sabbath afternoon at 3 p.m. That's where we stay for today. It was a pleasure having you, and may God bless you. Remember, as a few minutes after Let's Talk, we will have the link posted so that folks who want to share with their friends, their loved ones, you can always get that. May God bless you. Until next week, we will be right back here. God bless.